The day I got promoted to senior software engineer at Hartwell Technologies, I came home to a sink full of dishes, an empty fridge, and my husband sitting on the couch watching football like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't look up. I set my bag down on the counter. I'd been awake since 5 that morning, driven 40 minutes to the office in Seattle traffic, sat through 3 back-to-back meetings, fixed a deployment issue that had half the engineering team in a panic. And then, at 4:15 in the afternoon, my manager called me into her office and told me I'd earned it. The raise, the title, the respect I'd been working toward for 4 years. And I stood in that kitchen, still in my coat, and I waited. He finally glanced over. "There's no dinner," he said. "Not how was your day, not you look exhausted, just there's no dinner." "I know," I said. "I just walked in." He turned back to the TV. I should have paid attention to that moment. I should have let it mean something. But I told myself he was stressed. His consulting business had been slow for the past few months, a dry patch he called it, and I understood. I'd been covering more of the bills while he got back on his feet. That felt like love to me then, supporting someone, being the person they could lean on. I didn't know yet that leaning was all he'd ever planned to do. His name was, and I'll call him what he was to me for 6 years, my husband. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Capitol Hill. He was charming in that easy, effortless way that makes you feel chosen. He asked good questions. He remembered the small things I mentioned. He called when he said he would. In the beginning, he was everything I thought I'd been waiting for. I was 28. I had a stable job, a small apartment I loved, a savings account I was genuinely proud of. I wasn't wealthy, but I was disciplined. I knew what I earned and where it went. I had a plan. He had ideas, big ones. He talked about his consulting firm like it was already successful, clients he was close to landing, projects that were about to take off, a reputation that was still being built. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He spoke with such conviction, and he was smart, genuinely smart, the kind of person who could walk into any room and hold a conversation on any topic. We got married 2 years in. Small ceremony, his family, my family, our closest friends. It was a beautiful day. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the person I'll build something real with. The shift was so gradual I didn't see it happening. The first time he asked to borrow money, we'd been married about 8 months. His business account had a cash flow gap, he explained. Just a bridge loan between him and a client payment coming in, $2,000. I transferred it without thinking twice. He was my husband. He paid it back 3 weeks later. That mattered to me. It felt like proof that it was fine, that we were fine. The second time was 5 months after that, $3,500, another client payment delayed. He paid that one back too, but it took almost 2 months, and by then I'd already stopped thinking about it. The third time I didn't ask when he'd pay it back. I was too tired to have the conversation. There's something that happens when you love someone and they slowly, quietly rearrange the terms of your life. It doesn't feel like manipulation in the moment. It feels like flexibility, like generosity, like being a good partner. They never ask for everything at once. They ask for small things and then slightly bigger things, and by the time you realize the ground has shifted under you, you're standing somewhere completely different from where you started, and you got there one small step at a time. I was covering the rent, both car payments, though I was the only one driving. He'd sold his car to reinvest in the business, groceries, utilities, my own student loans from my CS degree, which I'd been systematically paying down since graduation. And I was doing all of this on a software engineer's salary, which sounds comfortable until you're the only income in a 2-person household in Seattle. I wasn't complaining. That was the other thing. I told myself good partners don't keep score. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself he was working, even when I came home to him on that couch, even when I couldn't point to a single client he'd actually landed in the past year. He was good at making me feel like the problem was my perception. "You act like I'm not doing anything," he'd say, and something in his tone made me feel guilty for even noticing. You have no idea how much work goes into building something from scratch. It's not like your job where you clock in and someone just hands you a paycheck. I didn't respond to that. I should have, but I didn't. The thing about gaslighting, and I didn't have that word for it then, I had to learn it later, sitting in a therapist's office trying to make sense of 6 years of my life, is that it works best on people who already hold themselves to a high standard. If you're someone who genuinely tries to be fair, who second-guesses yourself, who wants to see the good in people, you're already halfway to doubting your own reality before anyone even tries. I doubted mine constantly. I remember calling my best friend Tamsin one night when he was out at a networking event. I was sitting on the bathroom floor with the door locked, which should have told me something right there. I told her I felt like I was going crazy, like I couldn't tell anymore what was reasonable to expect from a marriage. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you happy?" I didn't answer right away, and in that silence, I think I already knew. The year I turned 32, things got worse in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. He stopped pretending the business was active. There were no more mentions of almost clients or pending invoices. He just stopped working, as far as I could tell, and filled the days with things I wasn't privy to. When I asked about it, he got defensive so fast it made my head spin, so I stopped asking. I started noticing things in our joint checking account. Small withdrawals at first, $40 here, $60 there, are places I didn't recognize. A bar in Belltown, a restaurant I'd never been to, charges late on weeknights when I was at home. I told myself there were explanations. Then one Friday evening, I checked the account balance the way I always did before the weekend, and I saw a withdrawal of $800 from an ATM on the other side of the city at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, the same Wednesday I had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home. I sat with that for a long time. He came in around midnight. I asked where he'd been. He said networking drinks, ran late, he told me about it. He hadn't. I knew he hadn't because I would have remembered. My memory is precise. It's part of what makes me good at my job. I catalogue things. Dates, details, conversations. He said I was remembering wrong. I didn't argue. I went to bed. And I stared at the ceiling for 2 hours and I thought, I need to start paying attention differently. I didn't confront him. Not then. I started documenting. I know that might sound cold, but here's what people don't understand about being in that kind of relationship. By the time you have enough clarity to see what's actually happening, you also know, instinctively, that confronting him directly will only make him defensive, and defensive means denial. And denial means you're back to doubting yourself again. I had been in that loop too many times. I needed something he couldn't argue with. I started keeping a private spreadsheet on my work laptop. Every withdrawal I didn't recognize. Every night he came home late with a story that didn't quite line up. I noted the amounts, the dates, the locations when I could find them. I didn't say a word. I also quietly moved 3 months of living expenses into a savings account he didn't know about. I'd opened it years earlier, before we were married, and I'd let it go dormant. I reactivated it. Direct deposit adjustments are not complicated when you know what you're doing. I told Tamsin what I was doing. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She said, "What do you need from me?" And that was one of the most important sentences anyone has ever said to me. 2 months into keeping my records, I got an alert from our bank. A credit card application had been submitted in both our names, and it had been approved. The credit limit was $12,000. I had not applied for a credit card. I called the bank that afternoon from a conference room at work, door closed, voice steady even though my hands were not. I explained that I had not authorized this application. They walked me through the process of disputing it and flagging the account. I asked them to note the date and time of our call. When I hung up, I sat there for a minute. Not upset, exactly, not anymore. Something had gone quiet inside me, the part that had spent years trying to find charitable explanations for things that didn't deserve them. He had used our joint credit history to open a card in both names without telling me. I thought about the $800 at the ATM at 11:30 at night. I thought about the restaurant charges and the bar tabs, and every time he had told me I was remembering wrong. I thought about the networking events. I went home that night and acted like everything was normal. I made dinner. I asked about his day. He talked for 20 minutes about a potential client. I hadn't heard him mention a client in 8 months, and I nodded and passed him the salt and thought about my spreadsheet. 3 days later, I met with a family law attorney. Her office was in South Lake Union, clean and spare with a view of the water. She was direct in the way I needed her to be. I laid out everything, the financial documentation, the credit card, the pattern of withdrawals, the years of sole income. She reviewed it without expression, and then she looked up at me and said, "You've done the hard work already. The rest is paperwork." I almost cried right there in that office, not from sadness, from relief. She explained what I was entitled to, what the process would look like, what the realistic timeline was. Washington is a community property state, which meant things were more complicated. But I had records, I had a paper trail, and I had been the documented primary earner for the entirety of our marriage. That mattered. I asked her how long before I could have him out of my apartment. It was in my name alone. I had signed the lease before we were married and renewed it every year, and she told me. I started counting the days. The night everything came apart, I hadn't planned the timing, it just arrived. I came home from work to find him on the phone, laughing, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. He didn't hear me come in. I stood in the hallway and I heard him say a name I didn't recognize, soft, familiar, the way you say the name of someone you're glad to be talking to. He turned and saw me. The laugh stopped. I didn't say anything. I went to the kitchen and set down my bag and I poured a glass of water and I drank it. I heard him wrap up the call quickly, some excuse about his wife being home. He came into the kitchen. He started talking before I could. Some explanation about a friend, an old college contact, nothing. Don't make it into something. I let him finish. Then I said, "I know about the credit card." He went still. "I know you applied for it without telling me. I've already disputed it with the bank. There's a record of my call." I set the water glass down. "I also know about the ATM withdrawals. I know about the charges in Belltown. I know more than you think I do, and I've known for a while." He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he went back to what had always worked before. He told me I was being paranoid. I was jumping to conclusions. I always did this. I always made things into a crisis. I had a problem with trust that went back long before him. I used to flinch at that. I used to feel the floor tilt. I didn't flinch this time. "I've spoken to an attorney," I said. "I'll be filing within the week. The apartment is in my name. You have 30 days. His face changed. Not into sadness, into something harder. He said things then that I won't repeat in full, but the center of it was this: that I was lucky he'd married me at all, that I had needed him more than he'd ever needed me, that without him I would have spent my 30s alone, building a career nobody outside my office cared about, with no one to come home to. He said it like it was a fact, like he was doing me a favor by stating it clearly. I looked at him. I thought about 28-year-old me at that birthday party, thinking I'd found something real. I thought about every time I transferred money, covered the rent, made excuses, kept the peace, doubted my own memory. I thought about the bathroom floor and the locked door and calling Tamsin and not being able to answer when she asked if I was happy. I said, "Okay." That was all. Just, okay. I walked into the bedroom, closed the door and called Tamsin. She answered on the second ring. I told her it was done. "Come stay with me tonight," she said. "Let him have the apartment for one night. You don't have to be there." I packed a bag. When I came out, he was still in the kitchen. He looked like he was waiting for me to change my mind, to cry, to negotiate, something. Some version of me that he thought he knew. I said goodnight and I left. The next 6 weeks were not easy. I won't pretend they were. There is a grief that comes with the end of a marriage, even when the marriage was wrong, even when you are the one who made the choice. You grieve the version of your life you thought you were building. You grieve the person you believed you had married. You sit in your friend's guest room and you look at the ceiling and you wonder if you missed something, if there was a moment you could have seen it sooner, if you are the kind of person this will keep happening to. Therapy helped. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that instantly made things clear, but my therapist gave me language for what I'd lived through. She explained how coercive control works, how it targets people who are competent and self-sufficient because those people are the hardest to believe are vulnerable. She told me that being manipulated by someone skilled at manipulation is not the same as being naive. That took a long time to absorb. I'm still absorbing it. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. I was in the office when my attorney texted me. I read the message, set my phone face down on my desk and went back to the code I was writing. At lunch, I walked to the Pike Place Market, which is something I do when I need to feel like myself again. I bought a coffee and stood at the railing above the water, and I thought, you did this, you saw it clearly, you made a plan, you followed through. Nobody handed me that. I built it. I moved back into my apartment the week after the paperwork was signed. I repainted the living room, which I had been wanting to do for 2 years, but he'd said the original colour was fine, and I'd let it go. I painted it a warm clay colour that I love, and I stood in the middle of the room and it looked exactly like what I wanted it to look like. That felt significant in a way I hadn't expected. I'm not going to tell you I figured everything out. I'm not going to tell you I stopped missing what I thought I had, or that I wasn't angry. I was, for a long time, at him, and at myself, and at the years I spent making excuses. I still have moments, usually late at night, where I replay certain conversations and think about what I should have said. But here's what I know now, that I didn't know then. You can love someone genuinely, and they can still be using you. Those two things are not contradictory. Your love was real even if theirs was not. And recognizing that doesn't make you a victim. It makes you someone who finally has the full picture. I have the full picture now. Last spring, I was promoted again, Director of Engineering, which comes with a team of 12 and a salary that would have seemed impossible to 22-year-old me, fresh out of college with a degree and a plan and no idea what any of it would cost. I called my mother when I got the news. She cried a little. She said she was proud of me. I said thank you, and I meant it, and then I drove home, made dinner from a recipe I'd been meaning to try for months, and ate it at my own table in my own apartment with the clay-coloured walls and the view of the street I've lived on for 5 years. I was happy. Not the performed kind of happy, not the kind I had spent years manufacturing to convince myself things were fine, just real, quiet, present contentment, the kind that doesn't need an audience. If you're reading this and something in it sounds familiar, not the specifics maybe, but the feeling of it, that low-grade disorientation of living alongside someone who keeps rearranging your sense of reality, I want you to know something. You're not remembering wrong. You're not too sensitive. You're not asking for too much. You are not lucky to have someone who treats you like a resource. And if you ever get to the point where you're sitting on a bathroom floor with the door locked, wondering what reasonable even means anymore, that's not a sign you've lost perspective. That's the moment you start getting it back. I've thought a lot about what made it possible, not just leaving, but surviving 6 years inside it first. There's a version of this story where I blame myself for staying too long. I used to tell it that way. But the more honest version is this. I stayed because I was trying to be a decent person inside a situation that was designed to punish decency. Every time I extended grace, covered a bill, gave the benefit of the doubt, I thought I was being a good partner. I thought that's what integrity looked like. What I didn't understand then is that integrity without discernment isn't a virtue, it's a vulnerability. Being a good person doesn't mean absorbing someone else's dishonesty indefinitely. At some point, honesty has to turn inward, and I had to be honest with myself about what I was actually looking at. That took longer than I wish it had, but it came. What finally moved me wasn't anger, it was clarity. The spreadsheet I kept, the attorney I called, the savings account I quietly rebuilt, none of that was revenge. It was me finally using the same precision I brought to my work and applying it to my own life. I had spent years being competent everywhere except inside my own front door. Once I started paying attention the right way, not hoping, not explaining away, just looking, the picture assembled itself fast. Tamsin asked me once early on why I hadn't left sooner. I told her I kept thinking things would shift. She said something I've carried since. You can't logic your way out of a situation you didn't logic your way into. She was right. I got into that marriage because I felt something real. I had to feel my way back out too, and that meant sitting with the grief of it instead of skipping straight to the anger. The grief was important. It was the honest part. The thing I want people to understand, the thing I wish someone had said to me clearly around year 3, is that surviving something like this requires all 3 of what I now think of as the non-negotiables. The first is your moral compass, knowing what you actually believe about how people should treat each other and refusing to keep adjusting that standard downward just to keep the peace. The second is the willingness to think clearly even when thinking clearly is painful. To look at the bank statement, make the call, sit with the attorney, accept what the evidence says. And the third is the stubbornness to keep going when the process is slow and exhausting and you're sleeping in your best friend's guest room and wondering if you made the right call. I had all 3. I just had to learn how to use them at the same time. My walls are clay-colored now. That probably sounds like a small thing, but for 2 years I wanted to repaint that living room and I let someone else's indifference talk me out of it. The day I rolled that first coat on, I understood something I hadn't been able to articulate before. A life that actually fits you doesn't happen by accident. You build it, on purpose, out of 1,000 small choices. And sometimes the most important choice is the one where you stop making room for someone who was never building anything with you at all. And still building, that part doesn't stop.